Previously on Sequels Don't Suck. But who would direct The Fly 2? None other than Christopher Wallace, the special effects master from the first film. In addition to The Fly, Wallace's resume includes Raiders of the Lost Ark, Piranha, Scanners, Enemy Mine, Deep Star 6, Humanoids from the Deep, and Gremlins, which has its own sequel, yes, and I will be getting to this in due time. Well, guess what, kids? It's time. Today's the day. We're finally doing Gremlins 2.
I like that movie. It was scary.
Wow, well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
Everybody knows horror sequels are terrible, right? Wrong. Today, I'm going to be looking at one of these overlooked and often maligned pieces of cinema history to see the good and the bad, to find the diamonds in the rough. My name is Horrorman Mike, and this is Sequels Don't Suck. Hello, horror freaks. It is Horrorman Mike here, and we are finally doing an entry that I've wanted to do since episode 1. Since I've even mentally had the inception of this video series in my mind. Today, we are diving into Gremlins 2, the new batch from 1990. Over the years, director Joe Dante has given us great cinema to enjoy. He's done Piranha, The Burbs, and of course, probably his greatest contribution to film history, Small Soldiers. He also did this little werewolf movie in 1981 called The Howling. I guess it's pretty good. It spawned a bunch of sequels that are fucking terrible. But let's go back to June of 1984, where Joe Dante, backed by none other than Steven Spielberg, created a Christmas horror comedy with an adorable mascot plagued by impressive-looking monsters. At the time Gremlins was released, combining comedy and horror may have been a bit of a gamble, but America certainly ate it up. Gremlins became such a huge success in theaters and home video, as did another horror comedy released on the very same weekend as Gremlins. That little film is known as Ghostbusters, which, like Gremlins, also spawned its own sequel, which does not suck. Gremlins is also important to American film history in that it, along with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which was released 2 weeks earlier and also backed by director Steven Spielberg, as he produced Gremlins, those two films created such controversy with its violence and in its scenes that the Motion Picture Association of America, after some persuading from Steven Spielberg, actually created a brand new ratings bracket between PG and R-rated movies, that bracket being labeled PG-13. So because of Gremlins, we have PG-13 movies, which, as far as film history is concerned, I think is pretty rad. The creature effects in Gremlins were done by Christopher Wallace, who would not be returning to do Gremlins 2 because he was busy with other things. Self-promotional plug, go watch Sequels Don't Suck Episode 1, The Fly 2. As for the new batch, Gizmo and the Gremlins would be created by none other than Rick Baker, whose credits include An American Werewolf in London, Videodrome, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Harry and the Hendersons, just to name a few. Personally speaking, I like how Gizmo and the Gremlins look in Gremlins 2 more than Gremlins 1. Putting them side by side, I just feel like they look more like real creatures and less like puppets. I don't know, that's just my opinion. Not only do they look and move better, but they have much bigger personalities, especially when they get into the science lab. The story's setting is not quite as good as the first one. Small town Americana at Christmas time, I think, is much more relatable to the average viewer than following a group of people at work in a super automated ritzy skyscraper that apparently has offices, walking tours, a science lab, and a TV recording studio, because I don't know, why not? So hijinks can ensue. It seems excessive, but it does go into the campiness of what makes this movie just so zany. The cast, I think, is where this movie shines. Not so much with Billy and Kate, played by Zach Gallagher and Phoebe Cates, reprising their roles from the original. I mean, they do a fine job, but they're kind of bland compared to the misadventures of, say, Dick Miller, Robert Prosky, Christopher Lee, and the Gremlins themselves. Even the extras have done great sci-fi stuff. Didn't these twins play cops in Terminator 2? And isn't that mailman, is that DiStefano from Alien Resurrection? This movie's sidecast is so vast and campy that even Hulk Hogan and film critic Leonard Maltin make cameos as themselves. So, side note on Christopher Lee, on his first day of filming, he approached director Joe Dante, who had done The Howling, and personally apologized to him for his role in The Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, which I've also covered. The film opens on Gizmo and Mr. Wing at their antique shop in Chinatown, New York. They get a visit and an offer from a multi-millionaire called Mr. Clamp, who wants to build a superstructure on the block of real estate that their antique shop is on. Mr. Wing declines, but dies off camera in the next scene anyways. So the shop is demolished and Gizmo is turned out onto the streets, where he's picked up by two scientists out on a specimen run. We get an update from Billy and Kate from the first movie. They've moved to New York and work in one of Mr. Clamp's superstructure office buildings. Mr. and Mrs. Futterman from the first movie are back too, visiting New York as tourists. After hearing the Mogwai song whistled by a mailman, Billy heads to the science lab level, where he finds Gizmo is being held and rescues him. After some antics and a broken water bubbler, Gizmo gets wet and spawns more Mogwai. They imprison Gizmo and Kate grabs a different Mogwai, thinking it's Gizmo. The other Mogwai eat and cocoon themselves, and boom, we've got more Gremlins. Lots of hijinks ensue, including breaking into Christopher Lee's mad scientist lab and drinking every chemical in sight, turning them into bat gremlins, spider gremlins, an electric gremlin that eventually gets put on hold in the building's phone system, and a super smart gremlin who kind of becomes a spokesperson for the species as a whole.
I
wanna talk a little bit about what's going on in this room, because I think there are some fascinating ramifications here for the future.
All the new Gremlin variants are super fun, and there seems to be a hell of a lot more Gremlins in this movie than the first one, which leads to a lot more shenanigans and gags. Don't think too hard about where all the Gremlins get their tailor-made outfits, and just enjoy the movie for what it is. It's got some gloopy, slimy parts, but is overall a safe watch for all ages. You could call this a kid's horror movie, or like kid-friendly horror movie, or a family-themed, I don't know, dark fantasy. But at the end of the day, even as an adult, I thoroughly enjoyed revisiting this movie and how clever it was, especially with its meta, fourth wall breaking moments.
Just re-released on video is the movie Gremlins, though I really can't imagine why. Now, I know some people found this movie fun, but me, I'd rather spend 2 hours having root canal work done. What's fun about a movie full of ugly, slimy, mean-spirited, gloppy little monsters who run amok and attack innocent people? Our moviegoers so desperate for entertainment that this kind of trash can pass for fun. Whoa, wait a minute! I'm just kidding!
So if you haven't seen Gremlins 2 before, or it's been a while, I highly encourage you to track it down and give it a watch. For a horror comedy sequel, it really doesn't suck. What are your thoughts on Gremlins 2, or is there a horror sequel you want to see me cover in the future? Please leave a comment below. While you're there, give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and stay notified for when I upload more content in the future. For today, that does it for me, and that does it for Gremlins 2. I am Horror Man Mike, and this is Sequels Don't Suck. It created such a controversy with its violence and... Time out, I'm going to do that again. Electric gremlin, even a badass spider gremlin, not to mention the big brain talking bleh. Oh my fucking god, I'm going to trip over that line. I highly encourage you to track it down and give it a watch for a horror blah 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 blah. So if you haven't seen Gremlins 2 before,